today's case, we are going to be talking about Sarah and Jacob Hoggle. And this case has had a lot of recent media coverage of August 2022, for those of you that are tuning in the future. A tentative court date was set for this case to finally go to trial. And I know that you're thinking, a case getting a court date isn't really big news. What's the big deal? But the events we're going to be talking about here happened all the way back in 2014. Yeah, we're going to be talking about something that happened almost a decade ago. We know who did it and who's responsible, but we're only talking about maybe going to court to prosecute it in October 2022. Sarah Hoggle was born in 2011 to parents Catherine Hoggle and Troy Turner. She was their second child, and maybe it was being sandwiched between two brothers that made her a bit of a tomboy. Her father, Troy, described her as a girl who was just as happy wrestling with him and her brothers before running off and playing with her dolls on her own in her pink and purple room. Troy actually called her his tomboy princess just because of that, and because she was able to have both of the sides of her personality and just really knew how to have fun no matter who she was spending time with. Just a year after Sarah was born in 2012, Sarah would be joined by her second brother and the third Hoggle child, Jacob. And from the word go, Jacob was a sweetheart. He loved his siblings and he was really kind and warm. Whenever his brother or sister were in trouble, usually it was the brother, Jacob would come and sit with them on the step while they were in their timeout that they would have had to sit there alone. So he would go out and sit next to them just so they didn't have to sit there alone. I don't know about you, but that just sounds adorable to me. And on the surface, this young family seemed to be happy and like people who just enjoyed spending time with each other. But there were some pretty serious problems going on just under the surface. Catherine Hoggle had a long history of mental illness, and we're talking about some pretty serious illnesses. Catherine suffered from paranoia and schizophrenia. She was medicated for both of these conditions, but Troy had a hard time keeping track of whether or not she was taking her medicine because Catherine also had a long history of lying about anything and basically everything. Troy did his best trying to juggle providing for his family and making sure that everyone was happy and healthy and his children were being taken care of. And at the same time, keeping a close eye on Catherine. It got to the point where he wouldn't leave Catherine with his children alone, and he worked out a system with his family and friends to make sure that there was always someone else with Catherine and the children whenever Troy had to go to work. And that's exactly what happened on September 7th, 2014. The family spent the day in a local park in Montgomery, Maryland, where their eldest son had a football match, and the kids just had a great time playing in the park and supporting their brother. But Troy had to go to work that evening, so he took the family, including Catherine, to Catherine's mother's house. They could all be together until he came back later that night. When he left them, the kids were playing with their toys and watching TV, and Troy kissed them all and told them that he loved them and couldn't wait to get back home so he could spend more time with them before he headed out the door. But unfortunately, he would never see two of the three again. Catherine waited a couple hours before she picked up little Jacob, who was only 2 years old at the time, and told her mother that she was going to head out to go grab some pizza. She was gone for about 3 hours, and when she came back, she didn't have any pizza, but more importantly, she didn't have Jacob with her either. When her mother asked her where Jacob was, Catherine told her that she had taken him to a friend's house and they'd be having a sleepover together. And her mother maybe thought it was kind of odd, but just continued on with her day, not thinking anything about it. She didn't really sense that there was anything wrong with Catherine or her story. And so she let Catherine put her remaining 2 kids in the car and take them home alone for the night. Troy got back home from work around midnight. But it had been a long day, and as far as he knew, nothing was wrong and nothing had happened. So he skipped his normal routine of checking in on all the children and kissing them goodnight. And he had just climbed into bed and went straight to sleep. He was exhausted. He would later say that he wished he would have checked in on them because he would have seen that Jacob was missing and could have maybe started looking for him sooner. But now he says he has to live with the guilt for the rest of his life, which is just heartbreaking. When Troy woke up the next morning, Jacob, 2 years old, Sarah, 3 years old, and Catherine were all gone. Only there was the oldest son. Troy at this point still didn't know that Jacob had not been seen since the day before. So actually, it was only Sarah and Catherine that had left together before he had gotten up. Troy had no idea where they could have went, and they really didn't have plans for the day. So he didn't understand where they would have gone without him and without the eldest son. But a couple hours later, when Catherine finally came back home and Troy could ask her where his children were, Catherine told him that she dropped them off at a new daycare. Troy was completely confused. He had no idea they were even looking at daycares. Troy let it be for a little bit, but something about the story and Catherine's behavior just did not add up to him. So he packed everyone into the car and told Catherine, "Take me to this new daycare." Catherine had him driving all around town, making up lies, and it was just around the corner. Just around another corner. It's to the left, it's to the right. Troy realized that something was really wrong. He asked her where the children were one last time. But when she didn't give him a straight answer, he put his car into gear and started heading for the police station. Catherine must have realized where he planned on going, and she convinced him to pull off to a fast food restaurant so she could pick something up. But when she got there, Catherine texted her mother and told her that Sarah and Jacob were fine, and then she just disappeared out of this fast food place. I can't imagine what went through Troy's mind when he realized that Catherine wasn't coming back, and he still had no idea what she'd done with his children, but it must have just been horrible. He must have already been feeling so helpless and lost, and then Catherine just left him when she was the only one who knew what was going on and where the children were. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in that position, but Troy tried to keep it together. He had a look around, and when he couldn't find Catherine anywhere, he figured out that she must have done something to his children, and now she was running away before she could be caught. And so at this moment, he was like, I'm done. I'm going straight to the police. He told them exactly what had happened, and the police alerted the community, sending out search parties and trying to find any trace of either Catherine or the children. Troy had put up posters, and he begged anyone and everyone that he could think of if Catherine had told them anything about what she could have done with his children, but no one knew anything. At this point, the police still had hope that Catherine had maybe hidden Sarah and Jacob at someone's house, or maybe even gone to an underground system that protects children from abusive homes, and parents of those people genuinely believe that Sarah and Jacob were in danger and were trying to keep them away from Troy and the police. But those hopes only grew dimmer when Catherine was finally found. Over a week after she disappeared, Catherine was found just wandering aimlessly around the streets, and she was taken into custody. It was already pretty clear just from looking at her that something wasn't right, and she was almost immediately taken to the hospital and put into a psychiatric ward. But her family and the police were still desperately trying to find the missing kids. They talked with and interviewed Catherine without her lawyer being present, still hoping at this point that she would just turn around and tell them that the children were with a friend or, something, but they couldn't get anything useful out of her, and her defense team would later use this interview as one of their underlying reasons why her mental health issues only continued to get worse. According to her defense attorney, after the interview, Catherine stopped eating and became even more withdrawn and confused, and they barred the police from talking to her until she was mentally fit enough to go through another interrogation. But in some weird twist of events, Catherine used family members to reach out to the police to tell them that she wanted to help with the investigation. She would ask them to come into the hospital so she could talk to them. But when they got there, she told them nothing. Her defense team also used this second interview as an example of how the police mishandled this investigation when Catherine was charged with the misdemeanor charges of neglect and hindering a police investigation, and it marked the start of a legal battle that would last for years and years. Catherine was declared incompetent to stand trial, and she was involuntarily admitted into a psychiatric ward for further care and evaluation. And this is why we are still waiting to get some real answers in this case. Authorities can't involuntarily hold someone in a psychiatric care forever. People are put there when they are charged with a crime for the system to go two ways. They either try to treat the patient and get them to a place where they'd be mentally competent to stand trial, or doctors could determine that they'll never be mentally competent to stand trial and that the charges against them will be dropped, or authorities will look into what they could possibly do in terms of treatment or keeping someone potentially dangerous, but also mentally incompetent off the streets. For misdemeanor charges, a patient can be held up to 3 years before a final decision has been made. And seeing as the police had so little to work with, Catherine was initially charged with misdemeanors. But this all changed when her charges were up to murder. And then they could hold Catherine for 5 years without having to take her to court. But that also made Catherine's defense lawyers even more determined to have her officially declared mentally incompetent, and it started a whole other legal battle back and forth between the defense and the prosecution. But in the middle of all this, there's still no sign of little Sarah or Jacob. Catherine's mother claims that her daughter would never do anything to hurt her children, and that she thinks that someone has them somewhere and they're alive and well.
So she continues to claim that they are with someone. So until this mystery is solved, that's my job, is to keep looking for it.
But the police disagree. They say that it's highly unlikely that these children could be missing for this long of time with this kind of media coverage on their story, and that the person who had them would have come forward and handed them over, even if they had been told by Catherine that Troy was abusive and that the children were in danger. Authorities say that there's simply been way too much media coverage to show what was really happening in the household and just how unstable Catherine's behavior, and that they say that anyone in their right minds would have turned the children in and explained that this had all been a misunderstanding. I do not know if I agree with that. I'd like to believe that if somebody still has them, that they would just send them back to their family, but maybe they feel that it's too late, it's gone too far, and they would get in trouble themselves for not coming forward sooner. I just don't know. But I would think that they would try to do the right thing and give Troy back his children. But if anybody else doesn't have them and is keeping them hidden, well, that just makes this case so much darker. The prosecution has built a homicide case against Catherine, and if they're right, that means that this mother killed 2 out of her 3 children, and I'm just not sure what to do with that information. It's heartbreaking, and the family has no idea what has happened. Her defense lawyers are still pushing for her to be declared mentally incompetent to stand trial.
Doctors are doing the best they can to restore competency. Ms. Hoggle is cooperating. She is taking her medication. As we've said, this is a young woman who is in the throes of profound mental health issues.
But the prosecution believe and are hopeful that the judge will agree with them that she is fit enough to stand trial. The prosecution quoted her behavior in Catherine's own words from a more recent case where they were determining custody rights over her eldest son and claimed that Catherine was more than capable of understanding what was going on around her. They even claim that she knew the law in her own rights better than some lawyers. And that's kind of where we come around full circle. Circuit Court Judge Richard Jordan was brought out of retirement to reside over this case, and he stepped into just a mess of a legal battle in history. He reviewed several reports claiming that Catherine was mentally competent to stand trial. He listened to her defense team explain that even though she understands what's going on, her mental illness would mean that she couldn't possibly understand the consequences of her actions. And eventually the judge decided to sit down and examine her himself, which is kind of odd. But anyways, he had both sides prepare questions for her and listen to her testimony. And now there's nothing for us to do but to sit and wait to see what he thinks. He did set a tentative court date for October 7th, but reality is if Catherine is still declared incompetent, we may never get real justice for the disappearance of Sarah and Jacob. The prosecution has until December of this year to try Catherine, and after that, the statute of limitations for her charges is up, and we will never get justice. The prosecution do have hope, though. They say that even if Catherine doesn't make it to court, she very likely will end up back in involuntary care because of her mental health. And if it looks like she's even made it out, they'll revive the murder charges against her to keep her off the streets. But I don't really know what I want the outcome of this case to be. I just want Troy to have his children back. That's what's in my heart. Catherine clearly is mentally ill and unstable, but that's no excuse to take out your own children. I guess I'm with Troy on this one. He said in an interview with People magazine that it's the police's job to figure out what happened, and it's his job to be the father and to keep hoping that his children will come home.
Regroup and move forward. We do not give up on getting justice for my children, no matter what happens. That will never stop until until my kids have justice, until they're found, until they're able to be buried, until the justice system works for them in some way, shape, or form. Nothing stops, ever.
And I have to agree. I think we all do. I just hope for his sake that he can stay strong long enough to see his kids come home, or at least to get answers. And for the rest of us, we'll have to keep an eye out to see if there are any more developments in this case. But what do you guys think happened to Sarah and Jacob? And what do you think should happen to Catherine? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I think it's wild that it's taken so long to figure out what's going on or what's going to happen with this case. But I guess it's good that the prosecution keep pushing for it to go to trial, because that's probably the only way we're going to get some real answers. Let's leave a purple heart in the comments for Troy and the surviving brother, and for Sarah and Jacob. It's so very heartbreaking. I say this all the time, but I think it's worse not knowing than knowing exactly what's going on for the family. Well, if you guys have made it to the end, you guys are rock stars, and I love you to death. There are more true crime videos in my Crime Stories playlist to check out. Stay safe, my loves, and remember, if you see something, say something. Bye.